Great. Welcome, everybody, on this fine Tuesday afternoon. I'm Patrick Gilster, the Manager of Programming and Monitoring at the San Mateo County Transportation Authority. My associate, Jennifer Williams, as you can see on the screen with me, we run many of the programs at the TA, including our Alternative Congestion Relief and Transportation Demand Management program that we're here to talk about today. So I will go ahead and pop this up. Except it's wanting to go to my other screen. All right, let's see if that'll work. There we go. Okay, you should all see our agenda now. So here we're today to talk about our brand new Acr Tdm program. We just adopted our Acr Tdm plan this January at our TA board meeting, and we're really excited to do our first call for projects for this Measure A and Measure W category. So what we'll cover today, we'll give a little bit of an overview of the program for those who might not be as familiar with it, talk about what the program categories are, how much available funding we have. We'll walk you through the application process and materials, discuss our evaluation criteria, and then touch on some key program guidelines on the schedule. And then we'll have Jennifer's and my contact information as well. And then we'll open it up for any questions. Big picture, this program for Acr and Tdm it comes from both Measure A and Measure W. 1% of Measure A funds are dedicated to what's called Acr, Alternative Congestion Relief, and that's actually spelled out in the expenditure plan itself. So 80% of the funds must be used towards efficient use of the transportation network and different types of Tdm strategies. And 20% of that is actually set aside for planning and design of ITS systems for improved highway and transit capacity. On the Measure W side, there is also an equivalent of about 1% of those funds set aside, which are actually nested under the highway program. So they are mostly competitive funds. Ooh, excuse me. They're competitive funds that are need to show a nexus to highway congestion reduction. So we are looking for projects that have VMT reductions. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means later on. Just a quick program overview. As I mentioned, we just adopted our Acr Tdm plan, which guides our project initiation and selection process. Measure A is plan-based, so we've gotten to detail out what some of those funds can be used for, including our ongoing support for commute.org's operations and a new countywide monitoring program that commute.org is going to be working with CCAG on as well. Some key highlights: we established a consolidated Acr Tdm definition and program goals, developed evaluation criteria and weightings, and identified different eligible plans, programs, and projects that can be funded with this category, as well as identified the guidelines for this first call for projects. So what is Acr Tdm? Alternative Congestion Relief and Transportation Demand Management are strategies that encourage the use of sustainable transportation options and enhance mobility. Acr Tdm initiatives work toward ensuring that people's trips are safe, reliable, and convenient while discouraging driving, managing congestion, and reducing vehicle miles traveled. So we developed 5 different goals that are derived from Measure A's goals and Measure W's core principles and the US 101 MAP goals as well. So all of these different plans that have different Tdm components have then funneled down to our 5 key focus goals, which are providing congestion relief, increase sustainable transportation options, promote sustainability and health, encourage economic development opportunities, and invest funding equitably. So through that process of creating the Acr Tdm plan, we've created 5 different categories that are our different funding buckets in this program. The first one, as I mentioned, is the intelligent transportation systems that's spelled out in the Measure A expenditure plan. There's also our direct allocations for ongoing funding to commute.org. One of the big things we heard through the development of the Acr Tdm process, planning process, was really a need for a consolidated countywide Tdm monitoring program that commute.org has graciously taken on and are currently exploring options for that to help implement and monitor CCAG's different TDM requirements for developers, and potentially expanding that to different local requirements as well for jurisdictions that may have their own TDM requirements on top of or in replacement of CCAG's TDM requirements. So more to come on that as that develops as well. We also created a specific category for planning funds. We did an inventory across the county and only noticed that about 3 jurisdictions had TDM plans. And so it was really important to our stakeholder group and our board that we provide planning funds to make sure we're allowing jurisdictions the opportunity to identify what types of TDM projects would be eligible for this category. And then last but not least is our largest category, is our Tdm Competitive Funds. So these are the funds that normally get set aside for the competitive projects and programs. So that'll be what the bulk of the projects are. So just a little bit of a different view of those by Measure A and Measure W. Measure A funds the intelligent transportation systems, the commute.org operations direct allocation, the countywide TDM monitoring program, and then does provide TDM competitive project funds. Those funds are going to be reserved for those projects that may not be able to show a direct nexus to VMT reduction, but are ones that we know may intrinsically have good TDM value. On the Measure W side, this is where the Acr Tdm planning funds are and the larger bucket of the TDM competitive project funds. So the first category, I'll cover each of these categories individually and just give you some examples of some of the types of eligible projects. This will not be a fully comprehensive list, but we'll be here to answer questions about that as well. So our first program category is the Intelligent Transportation Systems category. It is the competitive funds for planning and design of ITS systems for improved highway and transit capacity. Funding for implementation of these would be eligible then under the TDM competitive projects and programs category. So some types of example projects that we've identified under here could be mobility hubs and smart corridor plans that include different types of ITS systems, data purchasing, real-time information plans, dynamic parking sign plans and design, AV and shared AV types of pilot projects. Like I mentioned, this is not a fully comprehensive list, and there are as part of our guidelines, we have an attachment that has a larger list of all the types of eligible projects. Second category, commute.org operations, provides funds directly to commute.org to support their ongoing annual operations and programs. Commute.org provides a work plan to the TA for their eligible activities for how we monitor them. Similarly, they put a work plan together for the countywide TDM monitoring program, and then this would be how we are going to establish the TDM monitoring program based on CCAG's guidelines. Acr Tdm Planning Funds. So this is the competitive funds for developing TDM plans and policies at the local jurisdiction level. Additional plans that support the development of projects that are eligible for Acr Tdm competitive projects are also eligible. So a big thing that we are interested in this round is actually trying to fund TDM plans for jurisdictions and that really focus on helping to identify strategies that local jurisdictions can help take on in addition to developer requirements. This category can also fund things like Transportation Management Association feasibility studies, city TDM ordinance updates, bicycle parking plans, or wayfinding plans, to name a few. And then we have our largest category, as we mentioned, is our TDM competitive funding. In this bucket, this is kind of our more general bucket where it can fund anything from e-bike purchases or subsidy programs to bike parking installations, safe routes to school crossing treatments, things like that, transit pass purchases or subsidies, wayfinding signage implementation, and bicycle and pedestrian spot treatments. One of the big things I want to highlight here, and especially as it relates to the bicycle and pedestrian spot treatments, is that this category is not intended to overlap with the TA's bicycle and pedestrian program. It's meant to complement that. So things that may not have scored well in that program, such as maybe one small installation of an RRFB or other crossing treatment near a transit stop, as opposed to a larger corridor plan, or corridor project, things like that tend to score well in our other program. So this is meant to really find those smaller treatments that can be funded, including detection. So now about our available funding. So in total, we have about $6 million that we are going to be allocating. From Measure A, that's about 3.3 million, and from Measure W, that's about 2.7 million. As part of those, we have the direct allocations category based on the formulas I showed earlier that go to commute.org for this next 2-year cycle, which is about 1.1 million, which is consistent with the amount of money the TA has provided previously. And then the new program, the Countywide TDM Monitoring Program, will have about 192,000 for that program as well. What I'm sure most of you all are interested in is our available funding on the competitive side. So the ITS, the TDM Planning, and the TDM Competitive projects are all competitive. So you will do the application and will be ranked individually in these different categories based on where you're eligible. So for ITS Planning and Design, we have about 885,000. For TDM Planning, we have almost 800,000. For TDM Competitive projects in total, we have about $3 million. So almost half the pot of the funding. And new to our programs, this is going to be our first time with this, that we developed with our ad hoc group and with our stakeholder group, is a different split for small and coastal jurisdictions and a mid-large jurisdiction bucket. So that way, different size jurisdictions are competing against jurisdictions of their same size to make sure we are spreading the sales tax dollars equally throughout the county as best as possible. So a little bit about our application process for this one. It's going to be a little bit of a new process, but should be with the pre-submittal eligibility meetings, but should be fairly similar to our other programs like the Bike and Ped program. So our call for projects was officially released at our April 7th TA board meeting. We are hosting our call for projects workshop today. The link, this will be recorded and we'll send out a follow-up email when that's posted to the website as well. And then we are going to be requesting that we have mandatory pre-submittal eligibility meetings if you're interested in this from April 13th to May 6th. And you can request those by emailing me. And there'll just be a 30-minute meeting with myself and Jennifer Williams to discuss whether or not your proposed project is eligible, knowing that while we have a list of eligible projects, it is not a fully comprehensive list. So we want to make sure you're showing consistency with those, and that we will also be offering for projects that are located in an MTC equity priority community or a Reimagine Samtrans equity priority area, a reduced match. So our standard match is 10%. And so if we deem that you are meeting the equity-based criteria for that in a location for a project, you can receive a 5% match. And then coming up after, you will submit your projects. They'll be evaluated by an evaluation committee, which will be made up of someone from Caltrans, San Francisco County Transportation Authority, Stanford TDM program manager, myself, and there's one more, but I'm blanking off the top of my head. Sorry. I'll have to look that up. There should be 5 of us, but standard evaluation committee process that the TA often uses for our programs. So what you'll need to complete this application, we will have a fillable application for you. And these are all posted on our TACFP webpage, which I'll show in a sec. We'll have the program guidelines, the evaluation scoring rubric is up there. We have a sample governing board resolution that will be required to be submitted with your application, and a sample funding agreement for you to review and provide any comments on with your application. And then we will have the workshop PowerPoint and recording as well. So really quickly, I will show where this stuff is located on our website. So if you go to smcta.com and look under the What's Happening tab, we have our Call for Projects funding opportunities. So you can either go directly to the page for this individual call for project, or if you have not seen this before, all of our programs and all their information are located here. You just do the drop down for Acr Tdm, and then it gives you an overview of our funding process for Acr Tdm and the call for projects timeline. And then it will take you on a link to the individual page for this call for projects for our first cycle for this program. On here, it just gives you an overview of available funding, our schedules, and then the application process, like we just mentioned, with the pre-submittal meetings and getting your submission upload by requesting those meetings. All the application materials are listed here. And then we are also providing resources that can be used for this as well. We have informational fact sheets to cover what is an e-bike purchase or subsidy program and a transit pass purchase subsidy program. What are some of those shuttle alternatives like ride sharing subsidies or something like that that can be used as well to fill those small gaps in mobility that we see throughout the county. We've also included some sample scopes of work that can be used as a starting point for you to develop any plans. These were designed to fit within the cost of the available maximum limits of the individual categories. And that includes a citywide TDM plan, a mobility hub plan, a transportation management association feasibility study, a bike parking plan, and a wayfinding plan. So just finding different ways that you can use to start those as well. So submitting your applications. Applications are due on May 27th at 4 p.m. You will need to submit the fillable application itself, an attachments A through E that includes a cover letter with non-supplementation statement. As many of you are aware, it's required by Measure A and Measure W that these funds are supplementing, not supplanting your funds, which just means that they're not replacing any funds that are already dedicated to the project. We'll need a governing board resolution, any letters of support that you may have, your cost estimates for whether or not it's your plan and scope of work, or it's a project construction cost estimate for your request as well. And then attachment E is just any other photos or other documentation that you think might be applicable as well. So how will we evaluate all of these projects that are submitted? Each project will be submitted based off of our 5 categories or different criteria that are standard to most of our TA call for projects processes. That is the need, effectiveness, equity, readiness, and funding leverage. We normally have sustainability instead of equity, but we have made equity its own category for this program in particular. So need is the highest overall individual category, looking at where projects could be best implemented. Effectiveness really is more about how you plan to monitor and track success of your program and potentially identifying ways that you can calculate a potential VMT reduction or offset. And then on the readiness side, we'll be looking at your funding plan for a project and funding leverage if there are any other external funds from private development that may be able to give you more points as well. So the evaluation structure, the needs section is actually based on 2 parts. So it is designed to address the main 5 goals, except equity is now its own section, so it'll be looking at the main 4. It includes a qualitative narrative portion that the applicant yourselves will provide, and then we will be helping to provide a quantitative assessment that will be calculated in an online tool that is developed by SMCTA with assistance from Alta Planning and Design. So that will be different proxy metrics to help show, to compare apples to apples against all types of projects. So some of the things we'll be looking at. On the goal side for providing congestion relief, the majority of points go to the qualitative narrative response, which account for 70% of the individual goal score. And then the quantitative metric represents 30%. And it's scored in quartiles, meaning you're scored against all other projects that are submitted. And so all of this material is available online as well and will be provided in the PowerPoint as well. So for providing congestion relief, we're really looking for an explanation of how your project or plan will provide congestion relief and really is oriented towards reducing vehicle miles traveled. We, on the proxy metric side, are looking at areas with high VMT density, so census blocks that have high levels of trips already. That's pulled from CCAG's VMT tool model. And then on the flip side, for increasing sustainable transportation options, we'll be looking for how you can explain how your project will create incentives for people taking transit, biking, walking, carpooling, or using any other shared options over driving alone. The quantitative metric score for these is a combination of active trip potential from the MTC travel demand model, calculating where trips under 3 miles are occurring that could be potentially converted to walking and biking trips, and then whether or not you're located in close proximity to high quality transit based on the reimagined Samtrans routes. Promoting sustainability and health, we will be looking for how you explain how your project will enhance health and safety. We'll also be doing a quantitative assessment of pollution burden and cardiovascular disease that's pulled from the CalEnviro Screen 4.0. For those of you that do active transportation program grants to the state, that's often the source that's used for that disadvantaged community assessment. And this really focuses on those environmental health factors. Encouraging economic development opportunities. Please explain how your project or plan improves access to employment, job centers, business districts, or retail opportunities, and looking at how your potential project may be associated with different PDAs, priority development areas as defined by MTC. And then the last one, investing funding equitably. We'll be looking at how your project would address needs of historically underserved populations. And we'll be looking at the proportion of projects, how they overlap with Samtrans equity priority areas, and also MTC equity priority communities. On the effectiveness side, we'll be asking you how the project will show success and plans to track them. That'll be really describing how the project will be monitored, what the type of measure of success looks like, and describe how the project may be sustained beyond the 2-year funding cycle for this plan. The applicant will propose the monitoring strategy. This is a little bit different from some of our other programs, since this program can cover a very wide range of different types of projects, like we mentioned, from transit passes to installation of an RRFB, something like that, that may not have the same monitoring type of capability. So we'll be in our meetings together, we'll be discussing potential ways that you all can monitor your programs or projects. On the equity side, we're taking a big 3-prong approach to this, not just looking at whether or not you are or are not in a MTC equity priority community or a reimagined Samtrans equity priority area, but really looking at how your project is progressive with respect to income, benefits transportation disadvantage, and improves basic access. So we'll be looking for the responses to specifically address each of these types of areas, and you can actually get bonus points if you address all 3. So assessing if a strategy increases transportation affordability and makes lower income households better or worse off, so progressive to income. Benefiting transportation disadvantage really looks at if a strategy makes people who are transportation disadvantaged better off by increasing their travel options or providing financial savings. And improving basic access is whether or not the strategy favors more important transport to get people to and from where they need to go. So really the way this happens is we have a location-based evaluation, a user-based evaluation, and a mode-based evaluation. So location-based is kind of the more binary, whether or not you are or not in an MTC EPC, lots of acronyms, or whether or not you are in a Samtrans equity priority area. All those things, both of those we will auto-calculate in the tool for you. The user-based one is a narrative description of how the project provides benefits for low-income users, people with disabilities, older adults, non-traditional shift workers, or other vulnerable populations. And mode-based describes how well the project creates incentives for encouraging people to take transit, ride a bike, walk, carpool, or use other first mile, last mile options over driving alone. So some key guidelines in this program that are going to be important to keep in mind. Like many of our other programs, we are requiring a match of 10% minimum, and you do get additional points if you provide over 10%. New to this program and to all the TA programs is an equity-based match. So we are trying to not just provide funds directly for those areas, but also trying to reduce some of the barriers to accessing funds as well. So in order to use those funds in your meeting with us, you'll have to make sure we're aware of that in order to use those. And then other general guidelines that are important to keep in mind are related to maximum project cost. So like we mentioned, only about $3 million is available for competitive funding. So the pot is not as big as some of our other funding pots. This is our smallest category. So we have kept these to smaller projects with a focus on those kind of more spot type treatments in programs. So for planning and policy funds, that category is capped at $100,000 request. For the ITS and competitive categories, those are capped at $200,000. Jurisdictions are only limited to sponsoring and submitting up to 3 applications per call for project cycle, regardless of the category in ACR Tdm. So if you can't apply to 3 in each category, it's only just 3 total per this cycle. One important thing to keep in mind is our timely use of funds. So projects and programs must complete a funding agreement and begin work within 1 year of an award of the project. And then we are looking for you to expend all your funds within 2 years of an executed funding agreement. So in total, there is 3 years to complete and expend all funds for a project. Otherwise, the funds will be taken back and put back in the pot of funding for the next cycle of ACR Tdm funds. Taking a big look at our schedule, some really key dates to keep in mind. As I mentioned today, we are at our workshop on April 12th. We will be opening up our pre-submittal mandatory meetings from April 18th to May 6th. Feel free to reach out at any time to schedule one of those. And then project applications are due on May 27th. We will be doing the evaluation committee review during the month of June and providing our draft recommendations in July, and then going to the TA board for final approval of the recommended program in August this year. So you could then do agreements following that in August. And if you have any questions or to request links, feel free to reach out to myself and Jennifer Williams, and we're happy to address those as well. Before I open it up to questions, I want to take one quick look at the application, just so people can see what that looks like as well. We tried to make this as streamlined as possible. So while it does say 14 pages, it's not as long as you think, I promise. Some key things to note: there are some definitions and application user notes for this. We are looking for you to limit your responses to the available text box. Any text not shown will not be counted. To add a new paragraph in the text box, use Shift plus Enter. Just hitting Enter will take you to the next text box. To copy and paste into the form field, use Control-V. Right-clicking with the mouse will not work. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Jennifer and I as well. So in here, you have different boxes of which type of project you're selecting, the scale of your project, please input a name, the project location, and then the project scope is really looking at the project elements and intended benefits in one succinct paragraph. Think of this as if we were to put your information on a fact sheet, what is the high level information that you would want to portray? And then your overall project schedule. In here, you also have the ability to add sponsor agency information. So the eligible sponsors must be the ones put here first. However, the sponsor does not have to be the implementing agency. If there is a different implementing agency, please feel free to put that information here and describe that implementing agency's roles and responsibilities. For instance, if a city wanted to do an e-bike subsidy and then have a nonprofit implement the program, that would be where you would put the nonprofit in the implementing agency if you want us to do an agreement with that agency. And then throughout here, we'll talk about different program classifications on which type of project you think it's most related to. This will just help us sort into the individual categories. You will then detail when you had your pre-submittal meeting. And here's where you'll provide your description of Highway Nexus. So this is mainly to make sure whether or not you can qualify for Measure W funding. And in the guidelines, there's a table that has some different options for what generally has an outright highway nexus and what may or may not need a better explanation. So really, this is where we're looking to identify if your project may reduce congestion or vehicle miles traveled on the highway system. If possible, please include any specific highways that it may affect. As I mentioned, this is to be eligible for Measure W funding. And then after this is really many of our standard kind of TA information, your funding information, matching source and requirements. If you have any concerns about your funding, and then in this section with the need, you'll provide your qualitative descriptions, and then the TA will fill in the quantitative responses here when we run the projects. And so that is just a quick overview of the application. And then as you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. I can, if you have already downloaded the application earlier this week, you may notice that it didn't wrap the lines. So we have updated that yesterday. So make sure you use that most recent linked application. And with that, I can open it up to questions. Hey, Malahat.
Hello, of course, it's me asking questions again. How many applications each city can submit, and what is the minimum amount? I have one project in mind. I'm pretty sure Christian, our Tdm manager, has more, but the one I have in mind doesn't cost that much. I just want to know the minimum, if there is any minimum for a grant request.
We do not have a minimum. So the goal of this program in particular was to support small projects. So, and then each jurisdiction is allowed up to 3 applications.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
Hi, I have a question, Patrick.
Yes.
This is Audrey Shamizi from CCAG. For the ITS category, I think it said that potential projects can be for planning and design. Is there also potential for any sort of ongoing maintenance for existing ITS systems?
I do not believe our funds can be used for ongoing maintenance, no.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. And then I see in the chat, Nick had a question too, for safe routes to school, would things like bike rodeos and development of educational materials be eligible? Likely not. It's more intended for the infrastructure side of safe routes to school. Those types of things would be eligible through San Mateo County Office of Education's Safe Routes to School program grants. John.
Hey, thank you, Patrick and Jennifer. Really appreciate all the hard work you guys have put into this. It's great. One question on the 30-70 split. If there's a project that fits into both, a single project, but it fits into both geographic areas, how would, any recommendations on how to deal with that, or is that something we'd need to talk offline about?
It would probably depend on how much it overlaps. If it's a majority in a smaller coastal jurisdiction and slightly in another area, then maybe it could be that, but we'll probably have to do that on a one-off basis in those required meetings. But in general, we would probably default to the bigger category. Okay. That would be my initial response.
That's great. Thank you.
No problem. All right. It looks like Matt had a question in the chat too. Would employee-focused projects be eligible? I imagine it might score low, but would, for example, funding that looked into maintaining high teleworking rates amongst employees be providing by providing training or equipment even be considered? I definitely think it could be considered. Yeah, programmatic elements are eligible for TDM side, so the teleworking is eligible under that. All right. Well, seeing no more questions, we can give you back a little bit of your time. And then as you have questions, please feel free to reach out to Jennifer and myself. We're always here. And make sure you schedule your pre-submittal meetings with us to make sure you get an upload link to submit all your materials. And as I mentioned, if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And we thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.